Welcome to Module 3. We've already discovered why data stories are effective. In this module, we're going to be answering the question, what exactly is a data story? The term is often misused in the media, so it's important that we all begin with the same understanding of the elements of a data story. We'll describe your role as the data storyteller in determining whether or not the insight should be a data story, and then your role transforming it into one. We also will need to consider who we are telling our story to because it does matter. The student learning objectives for this module are identify audience characteristics that influence the narrative and the visuals, explain the 6 essential elements that define a data story, describe the 9 tasks and responsibilities of the data storyteller, list the criteria that determine if an insight should be transformed into a data story. So let's begin. A data visualization, first and foremost, is not a data story. The terms are not synonymous. As you learned in Module 1, visuals are a necessary component, but so is narrative. Just because a data communication is conveying some data does not mean it's a story. Data visualization alone is not data storytelling. Data visualization has different purposes. Let's look at a few of these. Data visualization can be used for analysis. For example, you're giving a data dashboard and you need to find sales figures for 2020 in each of the company's divisions. Or data visualizations can be used to communicate. You go ahead and prepare charts that communicate the key data in the company's quarterly revenue by product. And then finally, data visualizations, believe it or not, can also be created as art. None of these 3 visualizations was created with the intent to convey a story. And because we know that a narrative always combines with a visualization to create a data story, we see there is no data story as there is no narrative. Your book talks about a continuum based on 5 attributes. When attributes are clustered on the right, you most likely have a data story to tell. When they are more clustered on the left, you likely do not have a story to tell. Ask yourself if you are explaining a finite, concrete insight that you have curated to determine if you have a data story. Because developing a data story takes a lot of time and effort, it's important to recognize whether or not the insight that you have warrants the development of the data story. The moving from exploratory to explanatory visualizations is an important one that we're going to talk about a little bit more in the next module. But right now, let's take a look at the process through which data turns into action. We've been talking about storytelling, which is the conveying of the insight that we found. We haven't talked about how to find the insight. This course is not a course on data analysis. However, you need to understand that when analyzing data, you create many data visualizations in the process of trying to find the insight. You are, in essence, trying to frame the story. You can create all kinds of bar charts and line charts that convey all kinds of information about the topic, but they're informative for you. You are looking for that one deeper insight that emerges from the data through your analysis. No one will see all these exploratory charts that you made while looking for the insight. The insight is what you are going to take forward into the storytelling aspect of the journey, not the exploratory charts that got you there. As we work through storytelling with data in this course, this is the definition of data storyteller that we are going to use. We are going to begin by looking briefly at story structures, which we will go into depth within Module 6. News stories are written with the most important information first, followed by supporting information and details at the end. This way, an editor can cut the story somewhere near the bottom and the reader still gets all the important information. This format is appropriate for story framing. It's great when you want to pass along some information quickly. However, if you want to engage your audience so they get all the benefits of the story that we studied in the last module, we're looking for a very different format. In the story format, the storyteller provides context and the problem, along with attempts at solving the problem. The audience becomes engaged in the story and wants to see what the climax and resolution are. This is the kind of story we are going to be talking about in this class. This is storytelling. Let's take a look at the 6 essential elements of a data story. Your entire story is based on quantitative or qualitative data, or both, which you've carefully analyzed. Your data story is a work of nonfiction. Remember, fiction means made up, so nonfiction means not made up, true. You can be creative in how you present and structure the story, but the actual facts, the data, they must be true. This is one way in which your storytelling with data is fundamentally different than any other type of storytelling. Also, you must focus on one main insight. You will have different supporting facts, but there should be one main insight that you are trying to convey to the audience. This is your clear purpose. Going back to Aristotle in his Appeal to Telos, if you have multiple insights to share, you need to craft several stories to prevent the audience from being overloaded with data. Keep the focus on one. Your task in a data story is to explain, not describe. You are not just providing details of the features and the characteristics. Instead, you are helping the audience with the how and the why. You must go beyond the descriptive details and try to determine how and why something occurred. Your data story should be based on deeper analytical reasoning, not presenting surface level facts. In a data story, data points follow each other. These data points are building to lead to the main insight. You are giving the audience a little information at a time and presenting it in a logical order. Of course, when you're presenting in person or via Zoom, you do this by controlling what is shown to the audience. If the story must be presented as a written report, you're going to have to use the formatting and layout to guide the audience through the sequence. For example, I'm only giving you one element at a time here, and I could have 6 separate pages where I do the same if this was a written report. Data stories also have setting, plot, and characters. The setting involves the contextual details that your audience must know in order to understand the insight. These details must be included in your data story. You should not include details that are not needed or don't matter. Focus on just what is needed and structure it for dramatic tension. Characters are present in your data in that the data you are analyzing is generally about people. Perhaps you need to showcase a person behind the numbers, as Semmelweis should have done with the hand washing scenario in the 1800s. You are doing all of these things to get the audience to engage with your story on an emotional level. Visuals help make numbers approachable and consumable for an audience. They help the audience to see the main point you are trying to show more easily. Besides charts and visualizations, you can also use icons or photos to help tell the story. All 6 of these are needed to create an effective data story. These elements can and will be combined in any order, which is why they're not placed sequentially here. Data is at the center because it is the entire reason for the story. You saw how Semmelweis was unsuccessful when he let the data do the talking. Let's look at some examples where people realized that they needed to help the data tell the story. Florence Nightingale was a nurse who is regarded as the founder of modern nursing. She was sent to lead a group of nurses to care for soldiers injured in the Crimean War. While she was there, she realized that more men were dying from overcrowded and unsanitary conditions rather than injuries from the war. She wanted to put in place reforms to remedy this, but she had to get the officials' approval. She knew that they were not as data literate, so she created a chart that could, quote, affect through the eyes what we fail to convey to the brains of the public through their word-proof ears, unquote. In her polar area chart, each of the wedges represents a month of time and the number of deaths from different factors. The radius length of the pinkish red were those that died from battle wounds. Those that died from preventable contagious diseases are shown in grayish blue. All other deaths are shown in black. Notice how she did not present tables of numbers to the leaders. Instead, she created charts. And with them, she successfully convinced the leaders to adopt better sanitary conditions. She is considered to be the first person to use statistical graphs to persuade people of the need for change. Another successful data storyteller of the time was Dr. John Snow. Remember, this was the time before we knew anything about germs and infections and how people got them. Okay. Dr. John Snow was trying to convince authorities that the contaminated water was cause of many diseases, but they wouldn't listen to him pretty much the same way that the authorities didn't listen to Semmelweis. But he kept trying. Then there was a cholera outbreak. Snow mapped the households of the people who died and noticed that they were nearer to the water pump that was on Broad Street. He also noticed that there was a workhouse that had 550 inmates, but barely any deaths, but they had their own water well. Although the cholera epidemic was probably lessening at the time, Snow convinced authorities to take the handle off the well on the pump on Broad Street, and the number of deaths did decline. Both Snow and Nightingale were successful in using a visual and a narrative to persuade their audience to enact some change. Their success is directly related to how well they crafted and delivered their data story. Let's look at the 9 tasks and responsibilities of the data storyteller. It's your responsibility to find the insight and decide whether or not it requires a data story. You need to strive to be as objective as you possibly can, and you'll need to have enough context so that the audience will be able to understand the problem and the insight, and you need to know if the insight is indeed important or meaningful enough to resonate with your audience. You have to understand your audience. It's vital that the presentation be tailored to the unique needs of the audience to whom you'll be presenting. You will be responsible for determining what information needs to be included and what doesn't. You need to assemble the story. You need to organize and structure the data points to best convey the story of the insight. Your narration is what's going to lead the audience through the data story. In the case of a printed data story, your narration will need to be included as annotations. You will choose the visuals. You need to choose different chart types and options for displaying the data. How you present the visuals is of major importance. Finally, as the storyteller, you bring your credibility and reputation to the data storyteller. A perfect sound story could easily be undermined if the storyteller is perceived as being overly biased. Let's look further at the narration responsibility. If you are presenting to an audience, you're able to gauge their engagement and change the timing accordingly. You also have the opportunity to clear up confusion when confronted with quizzical looks. This direct two-way communication is often perceived as being more beneficial. However, it is not always possible, and sometimes you will need to use a written report instead. In that case, you'll need to provide annotations to take the place of your speaking points. In any event, it's imperative that you know your audience before you begin developing the data story for them. Your book talks about all the different versions of the Robin Hood movie that there are, each with a different target audience. The book asks if you would show the rated PG-13 version to a group of 6-year-olds. Absolutely not. Likewise, you need to learn as much as you can about the audience for your story so you can tailor the presentation to them. These are some key considerations that will dictate how you approach the data story with them. The key goals and priorities of the audience. What matters to them? Your insight needs to align with what they consider to be important, or it will not be of interest to them. Their beliefs and preferences. We talked about this when we were discussing the psychology of storytelling. The audience's pre-existing beliefs and attitudes will have an effect on how they receive your story, so you may have to modify the story to address this. Specific expectations. Try to anticipate the questions that the audience is likely to have and embed the answers throughout the presentation. Opportune timing. Kairos is an appeal to the right time and the right place. Make sure that the time and audience are right for the data story you are going to tell. Topic familiarity. Depending upon how much your audience knows about the topic, you may need to provide more or less background and context. Data literacy. Your audience may not be used to dealing with data and may find it to be intimidating. Do not use statistical terms or jargon unnecessarily. Include details only if they are needed. Seniority level. Consider how much of the audience at this level needs to know. If they are the key decision makers, then they obviously need to know everything. But if they aren't, then don't give them everything. The audience mix. Your audience might be comprised of people from different departments with different backgrounds and different agendas. Consider this when developing the presentation. Knowing your audience is one of the most difficult components of data storytelling, but not addressing these aspects of the audience will be disastrous for your data story. I'm going to address this point again. Does your insight warrant a data story? Constructing a data story, especially a complicated one, takes time. Does the insight require the amount of time spent? How hard or easy is it going to be to persuade your audience? If it's going to be easy, you may not require a full data story. A brief, truncated story may suffice. You need to consider if the findings are considered unpleasant, unexpected, or disruptive. You are more likely then to need a story. If something is complex, risky, costly, or counterintuitive, these are also situations where a story may be required. What I'm saying is that you need to concentrate your finite capacity to create data stories on the stories that actually require more to move the audience to action. If the audience can be easily moved to action and won't take much to convince, you don't have to invest the time in crafting a story to ensure that all of their concerns are addressed. In other words, the story zone is the intersection of the area where the insights will be hard for the audience to accept, but also have a high potential value to the company. These are the insights where you should focus your time and energy by developing a data story. After you've selected an insight around which to create a data story, your next focus will be on the data, which we will study in the next module.